President Trump announcing the framework for a trade deal with the European Union. The deal comes after months of talks and avoids a potentially destructive trade war. The framework calls for a 15% across-the-board tariff on imports from the 27-nation bloc, the EU. The president calls it the biggest deal ever made. His words, the biggest deal ever made. CNN's Matt Egan is joining us right now. Matt, walk us through this deal.
Well, Wolf, this is significant because it means that both sides have averted what would have been a self-destructed transatlantic trade war. A lot of the details here, though, they do remain murky. This is not a legally binding agreement. I haven't even seen a White House fact sheet on this. But one thing we do know is the tariff rate. This framework calls for a 15% tariff on imports from the EU. And this is lower than the 30% rate that had been threatened by the president starting on Friday. However, let's make no mistake here. This is not a cut to tariffs. This is an increase. It's an increase from the current level of 10%. It's an increase from the 2024 average tariff rate of 1.2%. And economists, they say that the bulk of these higher tariffs are going to be paid by consumers and businesses. And look, the EU is the biggest source of imports into the United States. Last year alone, the U.S. bought more than $600 billion of goods from the EU, everything from pharmaceuticals and cars to car parts, autos, alcohol, and machinery as well. As far as what else?
Yeah, so economists have been saying that this is going to be, the bulk is going to be paid by the consumer. Economists have also been saying this is going to increase inflation. Economists have also been saying that this is going to tank the stock market once these tariffs take effect. Listen, I was of the ilk that tariffs were bad. You know, as a Milton Friedman guy, a Thomas Sowell guy, like all of those, libertarian, right-leaning economists from back in the day, they wanted free trade, and they sold you on the idea that free trade is the way to go, right? If somebody wants to sell you or send to you a bunch of stuff, you let them, right? Because in the end, that'll create industry here. It can be distributed here, this and that. The problem is that everyone else around us is doing protectionist tariffs, right? So they're protecting their industry, and they're they're helping their workforce by not allowing products to be dumped onto their shores. So it's a little difficult, right, to kind of get to the other side of this, especially when again, these are all like super right-leaning or libertarian-leaning economists that have been saying this for decades and decades and decades. Now, if initially it seemed like the idea was to get free trade with tariffs, so you're doing a reciprocal rate, you're doing a so if you do 10%, we do 10%. So essentially, that's trying to get free trade because it kind of balances it all out. Doesn't seem like that's what's going to happen here. But what I'm starting to believe, or what I'm starting to think, is that in the beginning, right, on the onset, I think this is going to be a net benefit for the country. I think down the road, we might be hurt by this, but I don't think we're going to see that in the short term. I don't think we're going to see that during the Trump administration. I think that essentially what's going to happen is all of these markets, all of these countries, and all of these, they don't want to lose the U.S. market. The U.S. market is the market, right? We're the ones with the money. We're the ones with the disposable income. We're the ones where our poor still have more than the relatively wealthy in other countries, right? Our poor have AC, cars, televisions, internet. They're overweight. They got plenty of food. So the U.S. is the market. The market everyone needs to be in. Trump knows this. He's leveraging that. So what is he doing in this scenario? Just like they showed you. As of right now, we were at a 10% tariff with Europe across the board. The EU, that was going to increase to 30 on the 1st, and they settled at 15. It's a good deal. It is a damn good deal, considering it was 1 point something. It was essentially zero, right? So we essentially went from zero tariff import to a 15% tariff, and they're fine with it, and they're going to keep pumping it in. Is the consumer going to pay that? I don't think so, because what all that ultimately would do, I mean, they are going to pay it somewhat, right? It's not going to be the full 15%, right? Because what would that do? That would decrease the demand. That they're still making money. They're still going to make money. right? They're gonna take a little bit less of a profit margin, right, to keep the money train going, right? If they hit the U.S. consumer with that 15%, they're definitely going to slow down the volume of sales that they're doing, right? So they're going to play this balancing game. They're going to teeter. They're going to increase it a few points, right? Scale back on a profit sector or whatever, and because they still want to push this stuff out. Ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what they want to do. They need the volume coming into this country because we are the consumer. Let's see what else CNN has to say with this. And oh, by the way, if you can, please subscribe to the channel. That's all I ask. It does nothing. It's right there on the bottom. Click that little button that says subscribe, and you get my videos as they come up. Probably not, because you have to hit the notification bell, do some other things. But if you just hit the subscribe button, it does me a lot of good. Thanks a lot. Let's see what else I have to say with this.
Is in this. Again, the details are a little bit murky. The president says the EU has agreed to buy $750 billion of U.S. energy. He says that the EU has agreed to invest an extra $600 billion in the U.S. And in a win for European consumers and U.S. businesses, there's a 0% tariff on U.S. exports to the EU. But at the end of the day here, countries that reach a deal with the United States, they face higher tariffs than they did a year ago. Countries that don't reach a deal, they also face higher tariffs than a year ago. And that's why Mary Lovely from the Peterson Institute, she told me that U.S. businesses and consumers still remain the biggest losers from these trade deals.
And how is that? How can you justify that statement? Now, here's a problem with all these intellectuals and economists, stuff like that, right? They project ideas, they say things, and then if they turn out not to be true, no one goes back, right? Because no one goes back and says, "Oh, well, you said this and you were wrong." And people can be wrong and wrong and wrong and over and over and over again, but they have a degree and whatever, and then people just say, "Well, they're the smart ones." Well, if they're the smart one that's always wrong, they're not very smart, or at least what they're espousing is completely incorrect, right? So the U.S. businesses and consumers still remain the biggest losers. You have to justify that statement to me. You have to show me where I'm paying more for things, that it's not just the inflation that's happened over the past 4 years, right? Because that was the biggest increase for everybody, broad-based across the board. The past 4 or 5 years was the inflation rate, right, done by the Biden administration, printing trillions and trillions of dollars and throwing that into the system. That was the number one issue. Now you're going to tell me that inflation, that the tariffs are the ones that are going to do it? I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. I'm not seeing it. The people are not seeing it. Stock market's at an all-time high, and I get that's not middle America. However, these news agencies, these news networks, they're crying about the economy. Show me the economic woes, right? Gas is cheaper. Food is coming down. Everything's scaling back while we're increasing tariffs and taking in more revenue. Now, we all have to see that again on the other side, right? If we can bring interest rates down, right? Once we do a little dip in the rates and liquidity starts moving, right? People can start borrowing money again and moving and shaking around and start buying some stuff. It will become very apparent. I don't know how they're going to start spinning it at that point. Let's see what else I have to say here.
Wolf?
And what do they say about the argument that this 15% tariff on all imports coming from the European Union into the United States, 15% will raise the price of various products imported from the Europeans? It's basically a tax on American customers.
That's exactly right. And again, the EU is a major source of imports into the U.S. So you think about it, pharmaceuticals, aircraft, alcohol, all of these items faced dramatically lower tariffs just about 6 or 7 months ago. And now the question is, what does this 15% tariff do to consumer prices and to the overall economy? And Wolf, we're going to find out very soon.
Yeah, so, okay, so it's a 15% tariff. It was 2, right? So it's an increase of about 13%, right? Do you think that they're going to, if a car was 100, if you're selling a car for $50,000, right? What's that going to be? Let's say a 10% increase, another $5,000 on top of that. Like if the market just puts that, it bakes that into the cake right away without doing any other cost benefit analysis, they're going to get major dips in consumption. They don't want that, right? So maybe that $50,000 car, that if they just baked it into the cake, you would have to pay an extra $5,000 or $6,000 for. They find a way to maneuver that, and maybe it costs $2,000 more or $2,500 more. they're not going to put the total amount, right? Because in the end, they need to move product. And, if their profit margin is still, who else are they selling these vehicles to? Who else are they selling these airplanes to? Who else are they selling these pharmaceuticals to? It's us, right? And if we slow down our buying, then they're going to suffer ultimately in the end. So I'm pretty sure they're well aware of the situation, and they're going to compensate accordingly, and they're going to do what they can. Does that mean we buy a little bit less? Of course, that's ultimately going to be the case, that we buy a little bit less. But then, is that really a bad thing? That's also going to incentivize American makers to supplement that. Right now, you can get something that's maybe made here, or they're going to bring investments over here to avoid the tariffs, and that's going to be the long-term game for us, a lot of these companies. Again, because of the cycle that we have, where it's every 4 years we go through this change, they might just wait on the U.S. investment and see if this is going to continue over to the next administration, or this $600 billion in investment, the $700 billion in investment, Japan's massive investment. It seems like they know that the U.S. market is here, and to avoid these tariffs, they're going to have some industry set up here where they can compensate and make moves, and that's what he's doing. I don't see the downside in this at this point. I did in the beginning. I was very concerned, as most people were, as most people should have been, right? Because in the end, if you're charging somebody 15% more, that has to come from somewhere, right? That has to come from somewhere. I think a lot of these companies, they realize that they're going to have to eat some of it. They're definitely going to have to eat some of it, right? And so maybe we won't see the consumer over here is not going to see the entire 15%. They're going to see a percentage, of course, but I don't think that's going to outweigh the benefits of the amount of money that the government will be bringing in. Hopefully that money is spent correctly. I'm not seeing great strides in that. I really don't like the DOD getting as much money as it did. I really don't like the fact that Doge was like banned from going into DOD, Department of Defense, and really trying to figure out what the hell's going on over there. They've never passed an audit. They had misappropriated or couldn't find $2 trillion, and this was 25 years ago. God knows what it is at this point. It has to be in the tens of trillions of dollars. That DOD just has no idea where that money goes. That's not good. Right. So yes, we're bringing in more money. I would like to see more accountabilities to it, but you gotta sometimes we can't walk and chew gum at the same time.
We certainly will. Matt Egan reporting for us. Thanks very, very much.
Right, on his visit to Scotland, Donald Trump struck a trade agreement with Europe that ends a months-long standoff. He called it the biggest deal ever made, and it seems the European Commission president doesn't disagree. Have a listen.
It's a huge deal. It will bring stability. It will bring predictability. That's very important for our businesses on both sides of the Atlantic.
Well, joining me now is CNN business and economics reporter Anna Kuben and Professor of International Economic Law, David Collins. Thank you both for joining us. And let me start with you. The French Prime Minister, writing on X that this is a dark day when an alliance of free peoples brought together to affirm their common values, defend their common interests, resigns itself to submission. The French Prime Minister certainly does not see this as the conclusion of a very successful deal, clearly, for the EU. Your sense?
Well, I think his sense is similar to many other European leaders, which is that this was essentially an exercise in damage limitation. So, yes, the 15% across-the-board tariff that Europe has now agreed to with Trump is much lower than the 30% they were fearing was going to be implemented on Friday. But let's remember, it is so much more than the 1.2% average tariff that was on EU goods to the US prior.
So now the question is, what was our tariff going in? Right? What were our tariffs going in? Right? They're so upset that now they're going to be paying 15% rather than the 1.2%. But they keep forgetting that they were tariffing our goods, right? I don't know how many of you guys have been to Europe, but we see way more European cars over here than we see American cars over there. I mean, without a doubt. You just have to take a quick ride around anywhere in Europe, and Ford and Chevy, they're not big sellers over there. Right. It's all, and we buy them all like crazy, like over here that there's cars of every make, model, every kind is over here. So, they can cry all they want. They've been living high off the hog for a long time, and their industries have been very well protected. And they're, those are really good upper middle class jobs in manufacturing and stuff like that, that have been preserved through their economic policies. And now it's time for us to do the same thing in return.
Prior to Trump really relaunching his trade war at the start of his second term.
Is this a fantastic deal then struck by Donald Trump and just terrible negotiation on the part of the EU? I mean, how do you...
I think that's an accurate assessment. I mean, to me, this is a humiliating capitulation on behalf of the EU, and it really calls into question this amazing negotiating strength, this leverage that the EU is supposed to exert as a superpower on world affairs. It really makes you wonder, what is it actually doing for its member states if the UK can on its own get a better deal than this giant economy? So I think it's a real failure on the part of the European Commission in negotiating here. And obviously it's better than not having any deal at all at 30% or something, but this is really a wasted opportunity, I think, for the EU.
They don't have the leverage, right? He's being disingenuous here. They don't have the leverage. Are they a large trading partner? Absolutely. But they're not the honeypot. They're not the bread and butter of the world, right? We're, like I just said, like our poor are like upper middle class in most of the world. That's just the reality. Like the United States has been rocking and rolling for a long time. We're seeing some humps in the road, but at the end of the day, the United States, the U.S. consumer is king. That's where everyone needs to be. If the EU would have gotten on board earlier, I don't see anybody really getting less than 15%. I know that the UK, I think, did have a better deal than this. Maybe if the EU would have got on board earlier, they could have gotten a better deal. And that was said from the onset, right? It said, if you come to whoever comes to the table first is going to get a better deal. As these deals go on, like right now, Canada is shitting in their pants right now, right? Because Trump has them by the balls, right? The more and more deals that come down, Canada's up there shaking because what do we really need you for? You guys need us, right? You guys utilize our military and have like zero military up there, so you don't spend any money on defense. Same goes for Mexico, right? If your super big brother is next to you, you don't got to worry about bullies, right? And so they don't spend any money on defense. They tariff a bunch of our shit going into their country, preserving their markets, which is fine. If you want to do that, that's fine. But then you can't come to us and say that when we're trying to do it, that we're bad, right? Or we're evil, or whatever. They're trying to spin it and say that the thing that they're doing to us that we shouldn't do to them. Well, it doesn't work like that anymore. It's worked like that for a long time. It's not going to work like that while Trump's in office.
Absolutely a victory on behalf of the Trump administration.
Well, let's have a listen to how Donald Trump feels about the deal.
You've done a fantastic job with regard to the trade deal. They wanted a trade deal here for years, many years, through many different terms of different people, and you got it done. So I want to congratulate you on that. And it's a great deal for both. It brings unity. We didn't need unity, but it brings us even closer together. I think it's good for both parties.
That's the US then, the US president on the US-UK deal. So stepping back for the moment, this is a big week, of course. I mean, we've got this sort of Trump-imposed deadline once again for countries to sign up to deals. Otherwise, tariffs are going to go sky high on them. That is Friday, August the 1st. So this is always going to be a big week. What we've heard Sunday is this deal that you have described as capitulation. You have described as damage control. Others are describing as submission by the EU. Step back for a moment. What does this all basically mean? Let's start with the United States. Where are we at with Donald Trump, his trade deals and the US economy at this point?
Well, Donald Trump has said that there is now 7 trade deals with America's trading partners. Now, obviously, that's more than there were a few weeks ago, but it's still significantly less than what there needs to be if we're talking about all of America's trading partnerships. But this is part of Trump's real crusade to redress what he perceives to be imbalances, unfairness towards America from US trading partners. Just to give you one example, the EU, that really has been in Trump's crosshairs for quite a while now. He has referred to the EU as being designed to screw the US, and he's called out tariffs, but also the non-tariff barriers that the EU places on the US, like a digital service tax, for example. So the bigger picture is that Trump is still very much pursuing his longer-term goal of achieving what he perceives to be fairness for America.
Yeah. And David, one of the things that Donald Trump brought up today was that he would deal with the pharmaceutical deals or the pharmaceutical trade or the pharmaceutical tariffs soon. A few days ago, he threatened levies as high as 200% on imports in that industry. Now, I just want to get you some facts here. CNN reports that this threat is exposing China's tight grip on that industry. For example, China controls 80% of the raw materials required to produce amoxicillin, a relative of penicillin, of course. In this new chapter in the global trade war, it does feel as if, and it's where we started, I guess, with the Trump administration, that this is about China, ultimately. What do you make of his sort of fight against the pharmaceutical industry at this point?
Well, I think it's just another tool in his arsenal to inflict damage on China with a way to securing a deal from them. We know right now in Stockholm that's what's going on. And the more pressure he can place on these various strategic industries, like pharmaceuticals, the more likely he is to secure the deal that he wants to get from China, which I suspect will be forthcoming. Probably not in the next couple of days. I suspect there's likely going to be an extension on that, probably until October. But he's just flagged pharmaceuticals as yet another pressure point. And why not, if that helps him secure a tariff reduction or the intellectual property?
And ultimately, I mean, even CNN can't run away from this, right? Ultimately, this is what everyone on the administration wants to be talking about, right? This is what they want the focus to be, and this is what we were hoping the focus would be, right? We were hoping that we didn't have to make a video every single day about Epstein, right? These are some massive wins that are coming through. You know, like every single one of these deals that comes down, the subsequent deal is going to be worse for the next country. China's in the crosshairs. They know if they keep pushing the buck down the road and all these other countries get on board, you know, they're going to have less and less leverage to go forward and to make themselves a better deal. No one wants to be seen as capitulating, right? I mean, it seemed like Trump just went in there and just ran right over the EU without any issue. And because he knows that he has the cards. He has the cards. Right, we're the money banks. We're the ones that, you know, I've made this analogy many times before. When somebody with money walks into your store, you treat them differently. That's just the way of the world, right? If you know that they can afford to buy the most expensive products in your store, you're going to tell, you know, your sales rep or whoever, say, take care of that guy, please. Make him feel comfortable. Bring him a cup of coffee. Bring him a drink. Ask him if he wants something. You know, you want to take care of the people that you know can buy your stuff. That's natural. That's the way it is. And Trump, knowing this, goes in there and he just runs them over because he knows what he's holding, right? He knows that, you know, the GDP of the U.S. is you know, factors, you know, multiples over many of these countries that he's dealing with. So he's using his leverage the way leaders should use their leverage, and he's getting the stuff done for the U.S. that's going to benefit the United States. Guys, thanks a lot for coming out here. This was a pretty cool video. CNN going back and forth and, you know, not really being able to say much bad about what's going on right now, which kind of shows you how good it needs to be going if CNN isn't saying anything bad. If you can, please hit the subscribe button if you're still here. Thanks a lot. It really helps me out a lot. If you want to join me on the X, 6283TALK on the X. I'll throw a tweet out every now and again. You can comment or take a look and see what's going on next. I put up the latest videos there. And we'll see you again on the next video. Thanks a lot, guys. Later.